Hey guys, it's Friday now, and we're going to read the last part of our book for this week. We won't finish it. This is just chapter 9, but this will be the last part that we read for this week. And we're going to read chapter 9 of A Bear Named Trouble by Marion Dane Bauer. And we're going to find out what's going to happen to Trouble. In chapter 8, we found out that he had killed Mama Goose, and Jonathan had gone to tell his dad that the bear had killed the goose. And in telling his dad that, he also had to admit, how did he know the bear killed Mama Goose? Well, because he lured the bear to the porch with bread. He followed the bear into the night. He followed the bear sneaking into the zoo. So we kind of had to, go back and tell his dad in the middle of the night, here's what's just happened. And we found out that's when the bear finally got his name. Up until now, he's been a nameless bear, but in chapter 8, he did get his name, Trouble. And so chapter 9 is titled, Take Care of Trouble. So think about that for a minute. What does that mean, take care of? There's lots of meanings to that, take care of. Do you take care of someone, like you give them care and love and food and care for them that way? You may have also heard someone say, take care of it, meaning deal with it. So that can have a very different meaning of take care of. So let's find out in chapter 9, what's that going to mean? What's going to happen to Trouble, and what does it mean, take care of Trouble? Trouble? You named that bear Trouble? Disobeying one more order, Jonathan had slept on the living room couch while his father was gone, and he sat up now, bleary-eyed, but nonetheless awake. See, his dad had told him to go upstairs and go to bed and not get up, but I guess he figured he had broken so many rules. What was one more? Yes, his father replied. Do you have a better suggestion? Jonathan didn't even have to pause to consider. Killer, he said. You should call him Killer. That's what he is. His father sighed. He's a bear, Johnny. He did what bears do. It's what I've been trying to tell you. Jonathan shook his head, trying to clear away the image of Mama Goose, dead and limp, and so soft in his arms. He said, I thought bears killed to eat. He didn't want her for food. He barely stopped long enough to smell her, just knocked her dead and went on his way. Dad sighed again. Jonathan could tell that he was growing exasperated. Exasperated means like you're kind of tired and frustrated and over it. Dad's got a lot on his mind and trying to deal with Jonathan, and his concerns and his questions has got Dad feeling kind of exasperated. What do you want me to do? Capture him. Take him away. Take him so far that he can never come back again, Jonathan cried. He's dangerous. You can't let him stay here. His father looked surprised. He also looked enormously tired. Remember, he's been up all night. Well, we're going to have to catch him first before we can do anything, but zoos aren't in the business of transporting animals. Besides, but he didn't say any more. He's a murderer, Jonathan said. He's got to be taken away. His father shook his head. I think we're mighty lucky that Mama Goose was the only fatality last night. What were you thinking of anyway, luring a bear to our deck with food and then following him through the night? So when he says he's lucky that Mama Goose was the only fatality, he's thinking, he's just glad that Jonathan didn't get hurt, because, that was a very dangerous situation. I stayed back, out of the way. Dad snorted, a tiny puff of exasperated breath. There's that word again, exasperated. Do you have any idea how fast that brownie could run if he decided he didn't want you following him and came at you? 30 miles an hour, I guess. Jonathan had read it somewhere, maybe more. Yes, his dad replied, and do you think you can run 30 miles an hour, maybe more? Jonathan shrugged. When his father drew an eyebrow together in irritation, he said, no, I don't suppose I can. Johnny, his dad came over and sat on the couch beside him. How many times do I have to tell you? Bears are wild animals, even the ones in the zoo like Jake. He's been around humans since he was a baby, and do you know how far I'd trust him if I had to go in the cage when he was in there? Jonathan started to shrug again to show that he didn't know, didn't care, but then he stopped. There was no point in annoying his father further. Not very far, he said. You're darn right. No farther than I can throw that big brute if he came at me. Jonathan nodded. Anyway, he said, trying to sound reasonable so his father would listen, Mama Goose wasn't doing anything to him. Just making a lot of noise the way that she always does. All he wanted was to shut her up, and Jonathan swung one hand as though it was a big paw and found that he could speak no further. His throat had closed. I don't know if you guys have ever had that feeling like when you're so upset and you feel like you're about to start crying and your throat feels like really tight, like you really can't even talk anymore because you feel like you're about to cry. I know, son. I know. His dad put his arm around his shoulders, and I'm sorry it happened. I know you really like that old goose. So think about that for a second. Think about what you know about Jonathan and this goose. They're really, best friends. Jonathan is in Anchorage. He's in a new place. He's without his mom and sister that are still back in Minnesota. And so now his dad has said, I know you like that old goose. Really liked. That didn't begin to describe it, but all Jonathan said was, Rhonda loved her too. I told Rhonda all about her, and you know how she loves birds. She thought Mama Goose was even better than the seagulls we used to watch over Lake Superior. Yes, Dad agreed. I'm sure Rhonda loved her too, just hearing about her from you. But there you are. She's gone now. Actually, I think your she may have been a he. Mama Goose? A boy? Jonathan almost laughed, but instead he began to cry. He began to cry instead, big, racking sobs that seemed to rise from the soles of his feet. He didn't think he'd tell Rhonda that, too confusing, but he didn't know what he'd say to her on the phone now. Mama Goose was mostly what they had talked about since he had gotten here. His father said nothing more. He just pulled Jonathan closer. I've got an idea, he said, stroking the hair back from Jonathan's face. I think this will be a good day for you to stay home from school. I bet even your mama would agree if she were here to see you now. Jonathan sniffed, wiped his nose on his pajama sleeve, and half laughed. Being a teacher, his mother found very few excuses good enough for staying home from school. Fever, vomiting, or something major broken. That was it. She didn't know about this coronavirus pandemic. Would she understand about Mama Goose? What'll I do all day? He asked, though already he knew one thing he wanted to do if he was left alone in the house. Oh, I don't know, his dad replied. Read, watch a bit of television, maybe write a letter to one of your friends. How does that sound? Okay, Jonathan said, and then in case he hadn't sounded enthusiastic enough and his dad might change his mind, he sat up straight and said, good. Dad stood and pulled Jonathan gently to his feet. Why don't you start with a shower? Maybe followed by another nap. You must have missed a lot of sleep last night. Jonathan nodded and headed for the stairs. He'd start with a shower, no problem. But he wasn't the least bit interested in a nap. In fact, a plan was developing for when his dad left to go back to the zoo. He was going to call one of the local TV stations and tell them all about trouble. If they reported that a wild bear had killed Mama Goose, someone would have to do something about him for sure. So do you think this is what he's talking about? The title of the chapter is Taking Care of Trouble. So this might be Jonathan's plan to take care of trouble. Jonathan stood in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water slam into his head, his face. He stayed so long, in fact, and dressed so slowly that Dad had already eaten his oatmeal and gone back to the zoo by the time he came downstairs. So he fixed himself some Cheerios, even put his muddy jacket and pajamas that he had been wearing into the washing machine. Then he got the phone book and looked up the number. You guys probably don't even know what a phone book is. Back in the day, when when we didn't have smartphones and you couldn't Google or ask Siri for a phone number, you got a really big, thick book that had everyone's phone number in it and every business's phone number. And if you wanted to call someone or call a business, you had to get out the big book, look in alphabetical order, and find the number. So that's what Jonathan had to do. And before you guys ask me, yes, I'm old enough that I had to do that. The ring at the other end seemed to buzz inside his head. He waited. KTUU, Channel 2, said the woman's voice. Jonathan's mouth went suddenly dry. He had never talked to anyone from the television station before. He said again. Why hadn't he figured out what he was going to say before he had dialed? KTUU, Channel 2, the woman said again, a little impatiently this time. And so he blurted it out, the thing they needed to know. I've got some news for you. It's something you're really going to want to do a story on. There's a killer on the loose in Anchorage. Now I'm going to go back to the bear. For a while, trouble kept moving away from the zoo. The trees in the residential area of the city were heavy. Keeping hidden from the humans who were beginning to emerge was not difficult, and if there were other bears anywhere around to challenge him for the bits of food he occasionally found, he didn't encounter them. After a time, though, he turned and retraced his steps until he was back at the outer zoo fence again. He prowled along it for a short distance until he came to a dip in the ground beneath some fir trees. He curled up in the inviting gloom of the trees, tucking his aching muscle beneath a paw and waited. Aching muzzle. Yeah, where he got hit by the mother moose. Tucking his aching muzzle beneath a paw and waited, just waited. When it grew dark, he would go in search of food again, and maybe at last he would find a way to reach the bear inside the fence. So see, he's still just wanting to get to Jake. Because that might be kind of his only chance for companionship right now. So that is the end of chapter 9, and next week we will start chapter 10 and do some other works with bears.